This is hesitation standing at the edge of return. Right now, somewhere in the silence between you and them, a decision is being made. Not eventually, not in some distant future. Tonight, in quiet moments where your name keeps rising into their mind no matter how hard they try to suppress it. Something inside them is shifting, and the universe guided you toward this message because you were meant to understand that shift before the next chapter begins. Most people never talk about what truly happens when someone realizes they may have lost a person who genuinely mattered to them. The mind does not simply accept it and move on peacefully. The soul resists. The heart reaches backward. The psyche begins searching for ways to reconnect with the energy it can no longer comfortably live without. And that is exactly what is happening now. This person is not emotionally finished with you. If they were, there would be no inner conflict, no hesitation, no late-night thoughts, no emotional pull dragging them back toward memories they keep trying to escape. A person who truly stops caring does not sit in silence debating whether to return. They simply disappear. But this person has not disappeared emotionally. They are caught between fear and love, between pride and vulnerability, between reaching out and remaining silent. And the reason this battle feels so intense is because the stakes are not small. You are the stakes. What they feel for you is not routine, convenience, or emotional habit. It is something much deeper than that. Real love leaves psychological fingerprints that cannot simply be erased because someone decides to avoid their feelings. It lingers beneath distractions. It survives silence. It keeps resurfacing when the world gets quiet enough for truth to be heard. That is why they think about you at unexpected hours. Why they type messages they never send. Why they revisit memories they pretend no longer matter. Love does not obey fear forever. And deep down they know the connection was real. You knew it too. You were never imagining what existed between you. The emotional intensity, the pull, the unspoken understanding. It was real from the beginning. You did not create it out of loneliness or wishful thinking. Something genuine existed here, and the universe has been witnessing it the entire time. Even now, your energy still touches theirs. A song stops them unexpectedly. A familiar place suddenly feels heavier. Your name enters conversations where it did not need to appear. And every small reminder reopens emotions they thought they had under control. Because the psyche does something very specific when it believes it may truly lose someone important. It tries to reconnect indirectly before risking direct vulnerability. That is why the signs begin quietly. They check your profile without speaking. They revisit old conversations. They watch from a distance longer than they intended to. They leave small traces of presence, a reaction, a view, a sudden appearance that seems casual but is not accidental at all. These are emotional probes, not full communication yet, not complete honesty yet, but signs that they are trying to re-enter your emotional field carefully without fully exposing themselves. They are testing the distance between where you are now and where they still hope they might fit inside your life. Then comes the second stage, emotional testing. They disappear for a while, then suddenly return with something small. A casual message, a memory, a question disguised as coincidence, a reason to reopen contact without admitting how much thought went into it. Why? Because they are searching for evidence. They want to know whether the version of you who once reached toward them is still waiting emotionally. They are trying to determine whether the door remains open before risking rejection directly. And when your energy no longer responds the same way it once did, that changes everything inside them. Because your silence forced them to confront something they were not prepared to face. You are no longer revolving around them emotionally in the same desperate way. That realization shakes people deeply, especially those who unconsciously believed your love would always remain accessible no matter how inconsistent they became. Now they feel your absence differently, not as temporary distance, but as the possibility of truly losing you. And that changes the entire psychological dynamic. Carl Jung believed that unresolved emotional attachments continue resurfacing until the deeper truth beneath them is finally acknowledged honestly. That is why this person cannot fully move forward, no matter how hard they try to distract themselves. The connection remains psychologically unfinished inside them. And unfinished emotional truths are impossible to silence forever. Part of them wants to return fully. Part of them fears vulnerability. One side wants closeness. The other side wants emotional control. Those two forces are colliding inside them constantly now. That collision creates confusion, delayed messages, watching without speaking, sudden emotional warmth followed by withdrawal, moments where they almost reach out, then retreat again. This is not always manipulation. Sometimes it is the behavior of someone who feels deeply but lacks the emotional clarity to handle the intensity of what they feel. Because genuine emotional exposure terrifies people who spent years protecting themselves through distance and control, but something inside them is beginning to crack open anyway. They are realizing you did not walk away because you stopped loving them. You stepped back because staying began costing you your peace. And that truth humbles them more than anger ever could. Now they replay moments differently. They remember the patience you gave them, the emotional consistency you offered, the times you tried to create clarity while they avoided difficult conversations. And slowly another realization is forming. You are not difficult to love, you simply required honesty. And honesty becomes frightening for people who spent years avoiding themselves emotionally. But listen carefully, because this next part matters deeply. Their emotional awakening does not mean you should abandon your healing. You are no longer responsible for carrying the emotional weight of this connection alone. Your role now is not chasing, convincing, or rescuing. Your role is protecting the peace you fought hard to rebuild inside yourself. Because during this silence, something transformed inside you too. You became stronger, more emotionally aware, less willing to confuse inconsistency with love. You learned that real love should not leave you constantly anxious, exhausted, and emotionally uncertain. That lesson changed your energy completely, and they feel that shift. They sense you pulling your focus back toward yourself. They sense your emotional independence growing, and nothing unsettles someone faster than realizing the person they assumed would always wait is finally learning how to live fully without them. Now the fear becomes real, not fear of losing control, fear of losing you permanently. And that fear is forcing them into a decision they can no longer avoid forever. Do they continue hiding behind silence, or finally risk vulnerability and tell the truth? That is the crossroads they are standing at tonight. But remember this above everything else. Whether they return or not, your value does not depend on their readiness anymore. You already reclaimed yourself, and that is the deeper transformation unfolding beneath all this silence. Because maybe the real purpose of this connection was never only to awaken love inside them, maybe it was also meant to awaken self-worth inside you. If they have appeared near your energy in any way lately, through a sudden message, a strange feeling, a memory that arrived out of nowhere, or even a small moment that seemed insignificant, the truth is already beginning to escape through the cracks. That is how it starts. Not with dramatic declarations, not with perfect words, but with small emotional leaks that reveal far more than they intended. A message shorter than it should be, yet somehow heavy with meaning. A random question they did not truly need answered. A conversation that begins casually but slowly drifts towards something deeper. A confession hidden inside ordinary language. Those moments are not accidents. They happen when someone is trying to control emotions that no longer want to stay hidden. That is not weakness. That is love searching for an opening. Right now, this person is revisiting your energy constantly, even if they never admit it aloud. They open old conversations between you. They reread things you once said. They pause at certain messages longer than they expected to. They notice timestamps. They scroll upward through memories they pretended no longer mattered. They pick up the phone, put it down, pick it up again. Your name sits there in silence while they stare at the empty message box, trying to decide whether to cross the distance between you. They type something, delete it, start again, stop. Not because they have nothing to say, but because what they truly feel carries emotional weight they are still trying to control. Then they reread your old words one more time, hoping somehow the past will answer the question they cannot stop asking themselves. Did I really lose this person? That is not the behavior of someone emotionally finished with you. That is someone struggling against feelings larger than their pride, larger than their fear, larger than the version of themselves that once tried to act unaffected. Because what they feel for you did not disappear simply because silence arrived. The distance never erased it. The lack of communication never erased it. Even time failed to erase it. What exists between two people at this depth does not vanish on command. The universe does not place connections this emotionally powerful into someone's life without purpose. And what was awakened between you is still moving beneath the surface, even now. Love like this is not logical. It does not obey schedules. It does not disappear because someone decides it would be easier if it did. And it certainly does not fade simply because fear tells it to stay quiet. Admiration cannot keep someone awake until sunrise. Habit cannot create emotional restlessness that follows a person through every quiet moment of the night. Only real love does that. The kind that becomes inconvenient. The kind that refuses to stay buried. The kind that survives distance even when both people try to pretend they are unaffected. At night, the truth becomes impossible for them to avoid. During the day, they manage themselves well enough. They answer messages, they complete responsibilities, they move through routines appearing normal to everyone around them, but nighttime removes distractions. And once distractions disappear, truth gets louder. At 2 a.m., they think about you. At 3 a.m., your absence feels heavier than they expected. At 4 a.m., they are still awake, caught between wanting to reach for you and fearing what vulnerability might cost them. Because nighttime strips people down emotionally, there are no performances there, no distractions strong enough to silence what the heart keeps repeating. And the hardest part for them is this: even their dreams no longer cooperate. During sleep, the walls they built around their emotions weaken. The subconscious mind begins replaying what the conscious mind spent all day avoiding. So they dream about you. Not vague memories, you, your laugh, your voice, the warmth in your eyes. The feeling of being emotionally safe beside you before fear complicated everything. In those dreams, there is no distance between you, no silence, no pride, no emotional walls, just presence, just connection, just the version of the bond that once felt honest and alive. Then they wake up, and for a few seconds they forget reality. For a few fragile moments it feels like you are still there. Then the silence returns all over again. And that is when the truth hits hardest, because they are beginning to realize something painful. No distraction has truly replaced what they felt with you. They tried. They convinced themselves time would weaken it. They told themselves distance would make everything easier. But emotional depth does not disappear that cleanly, especially when someone realizes too late that the person they lost offered something rare, genuine emotional understanding. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious mind constantly pushes unresolved emotional truths back into awareness until they are finally confronted honestly. That is exactly why your energy keeps resurfacing inside them now. The connection remains unfinished within their psyche, and unfinished emotional truths return again and again until they are either healed or fully faced. That is why they keep circling back emotionally. Why your name keeps appearing in their thoughts unexpectedly. Why silence feels heavier instead of lighter. Because deep down they know this was never casual. You touched parts of them most people never reached. The softer parts, the vulnerable parts, the emotionally human parts they spent years protecting behind distance, control, and emotional hesitation. And now they cannot fully return to who they were before you awakened those pieces inside them. That realization changes people permanently. But this next part matters deeply. Do not confuse their emotional awakening with your responsibility to save them. Your role now is not chasing clarity or reopening wounds simply because they finally recognize your value more clearly. Your role is protecting the peace you rebuilt while surviving this silence, because something transformed inside you too. You learned how to stop begging for emotional consistency. You learned how to stop carrying relationships entirely on your own. You learned that love should not leave you constantly anxious, exhausted, and emotionally uncertain. That lesson changed your energy completely, and they feel it. They sense that you are no longer waiting in the same desperate way. They feel your emotional center returning to yourself, and nothing unsettles someone faster than realizing the person they assumed would always stay is finally learning how to live fully without them. That realization is what forces the truth forward. Not manipulation, not games. Truth. The truth that says, you mattered, the connection mattered, and losing your presence changed something inside them they can no longer ignore. But remember this above all else. Whether they return or not, your worth no longer depends on their ability to recognize it. You already reclaimed yourself. And that is the real transformation unfolding beneath all this silence. Somewhere tonight, a heart that once convinced itself it could live without you is quietly losing the battle against your absence. They thought distance would weaken what they feel, that silence would slowly erase the connection, that time would teach them how to move on. But instead, your absence has become louder than your presence ever was. In the quiet hours of the night, when distractions fade and the world grows still, your memory returns to them with a force they can no longer ignore. Every song, every place, every small reminder pulls them back toward you. Because real love does not disappear simply because two people stop speaking. It lingers, it waits, it echoes through silence until the truth can no longer be denied. And the truth is this: no matter how hard they try to bury what they feel, some connections are too deep to fade, too real to replace, and too powerful to forget. Some days, they feel certain they should reach out. Other days, fear convinces them to remain silent. At times, they replay memories with warmth and longing. Other times, they retreat emotionally because distance feels safer than exposure. This push and pull dynamic is not always manipulation. Sometimes it is what happens when someone feels something deeply but lacks the emotional clarity or maturity to navigate the intensity of it properly. The more meaningful the connection becomes, the more terrifying vulnerability can feel to someone emotionally unprepared for genuine intimacy. That is why your silence changed everything. Silence removed their ability to remain emotionally half-invested while still benefiting from your presence. Now they are being forced to confront a choice internally: continue avoiding what they truly feel, or finally face it honestly. And that confrontation changes people, especially when they realize something painful. You did not walk away because you stopped loving them. You stepped back because you finally loved yourself enough to stop accepting emotional inconsistency. That truth follows them constantly now. They replay moments where you tried to communicate openly while they withdrew emotionally. They remember times your needs were obvious, yet they delayed responding. They remember moments where pride stood where honesty should have stood. And slowly, those memories are becoming heavier, not because you tried to make them feel guilty, but because self-awareness naturally creates accountability. Carl Jung often spoke about the suffering that occurs when a person's actions become disconnected from their deeper emotional truth. That is exactly what is happening within them now. What they feel and how they behave no longer align comfortably, and that emotional mismatch creates psychological tension that keeps building over time. Now they are beginning to understand something difficult. Avoiding vulnerability never truly protected them emotionally. It only delayed emotional truth. And delayed emotional truth eventually becomes impossible to ignore. That is why they feel restless now, why your silence feels louder than your words ever did, why their thoughts repeatedly return towards you even when they try focusing elsewhere. Because unresolved emotional truth continues resurfacing until it is finally acknowledged honestly. But listen carefully, because this next part matters deeply. Their emotional struggle is no longer your responsibility to carry. You are no longer required to rescue someone from lessons they avoided while you exhausted yourself trying to hold the connection together alone. That version of your life is ending, and something healthier is beginning inside you now. You are learning to stop confusing emotional suffering with emotional depth. You are learning that uncertainty is not proof of love. You are learning that real connection should never leave you constantly questioning your value. That understanding changes everything, because even if they return someday, they will not meet the same version of you who once tolerated imbalance simply out of fear of losing them. You are becoming steadier, more emotionally grounded, more aware of what healthy love actually requires, and that transformation is permanent. Now they feel your energy shifting too. They sense that you are no longer emotionally available in the same desperate way. They feel you slowly releasing the need to force an outcome or hold onto the connection at any cost. And strangely, that emotional independence pulls them toward you even more strongly. Because people often begin fully valuing emotional safety only after realizing it is no longer guaranteed. And that realization creates urgency they can no longer ignore. But urgency by itself changes nothing. This part matters deeply, so listen carefully. If they ever return in a meaningful way, it cannot come only from the fear of losing you. Fear may create temporary effort, but only real emotional growth creates lasting change. There is a major difference between someone missing your presence and someone becoming emotionally mature enough to truly protect your heart. And that difference matters more than longing itself, because love without growth eventually repeats the same painful patterns. That is why your silence has become so powerful, not as punishment, not as manipulation, but because distance created the one thing they could no longer escape: truth. For the first time, they are being forced to sit with themselves honestly. And while they are confronting their inner world, something equally important is happening inside you. You are rebuilding yourself. You are learning how to live without constantly chasing emotional reassurance. You are reconnecting with the version of yourself that existed before confusion consumed your peace. Slowly, you are becoming emotionally whole again. That is the real transformation here. Not whether they miss you, not whether they regret losing you, but whether you finally stop abandoning yourself emotionally for people unwilling to meet you with the same depth you offered them. Once you truly understand your value, your entire relationship with love changes forever. You stop mistaking emotional chaos for passion. You stop romanticizing inconsistency. You stop believing that suffering is proof of connection. And whether you fully realize it yet or not, you are already stepping into that transformation now. Meanwhile, something inside them is shifting too. The silence no longer feels safe to them the way it once did. What they once used as emotional protection now feels like emotional loss. And that realization is changing everything happening inside their mind. For a long time, they believed emotional distance gave them control. They convinced themselves that avoiding vulnerability protected them from pain. They believed if they stayed guarded long enough, they could avoid facing what they truly felt. But emotional truth does not disappear simply because someone delays confronting it. Carl Jung believed the unconscious mind repeatedly pushes unresolved emotional truths back into awareness until they are finally acknowledged honestly. That is exactly what is happening to them now. The more they tried to suppress their feelings, the stronger those feelings quietly became beneath the surface. Because repression does not remove emotional truth, it intensifies it over time. Now memories return more vividly than before. Not only the dramatic moments, but the smallest ones. Your voice, your patience, the emotional warmth you brought into ordinary conversations, the sense of peace they felt around you before fear complicated everything. And now they are beginning to understand something painful. You were never asking for too much, you were asking for honesty, consistency, presence, emotional clarity. Deep down, they know they struggled to give those things fully. And that awareness creates enormous emotional pressure because now they are finally seeing their own patterns clearly, the avoidance, the hesitation, the fear disguised as independence, the tendency to retreat when emotional intimacy became real. Once someone truly sees their own emotional patterns honestly, life becomes impossible to experience in the same unconscious way again. Now silence feels intentional to them. Now emotional distance feels like a choice instead of an accident. And this realization is forcing them into an uncomfortable crossroads: continue hiding behind emotional control and lose something meaningful, or finally risk vulnerability and face the truth. That choice terrifies them more than they expected, because vulnerability feels dangerous to people who survived by controlling their emotions instead of expressing them. But here is the deeper truth. Your connection awakened emotional needs they spent years trying to ignore: the need to feel understood, the need to feel emotionally safe, the need for genuine connection instead of constantly performing emotional strength. You awakened those parts simply by loving them sincerely. And now they cannot unknow what they felt with you. That is why your absence feels so heavy. Because your silence forced them into direct contact with emotions they once escaped through distraction, work, routines, and emotional distance. But distractions are no longer working the way they used to. Nothing fully replaces emotional depth once it reaches a certain level. But listen carefully, because this next part matters deeply. Their emotional struggle is no longer your responsibility to carry. It is not your job to abandon your peace simply because they finally recognize your value. It is not your responsibility to reopen emotional wounds just because they are beginning to confront truths they once avoided. Your healing matters too. Your emotional stability matters too. And during this silence, you confronted something important inside yourself as well. Your tendency to overgive. Your habit of carrying relationships through effort alone. Your willingness to stay loyal even after emotional reciprocity disappeared. That awareness changed you permanently. Now you understand something powerful. Love should not require emotional self-abandonment. Love should not leave you constantly anxious about where you stand. Love should not force you to prove your value repeatedly to someone emotionally unavailable. That realization is creating emotional freedom inside you, and emotional freedom changes everything. You no longer feel consumed by the need for constant answers. You no longer feel trapped inside uncertainty the way you once did. You are beginning to separate your worth from another person's ability to choose you clearly. That is real transformation. Carl Jung often spoke about individuation, the process of becoming fully yourself emotionally and psychologically, instead of depending on external validation for identity. That process is unfolding inside you now, and strangely, the more emotionally grounded you become, the more intensely they feel your absence. Because people notice when your energy stops revolving around them. They feel when you stop waiting in the same desperate way. And nothing creates emotional urgency faster than realizing the person who once centered their emotional world around you is finally learning how to live fully without them. Now they fear something they never feared before, not losing control, losing you permanently. That fear is forcing them to reevaluate everything. They replay old moments differently now. They question choices they once justified easily. They wonder whether pride cost them something irreplaceable. And those questions grow louder every day. But this final truth matters most of all. Whether they return or not, you are already becoming stronger than the version of yourself who first entered this connection. You are learning how to love without disappearing inside another person. You are learning how to stay open-hearted without sacrificing your emotional center. You are learning that your value does not decrease simply because someone else lacked the readiness to meet you fully. That lesson changes your future forever. Because once someone truly understands their emotional worth, they stop settling for relationships built on confusion, inconsistency, and emotional half-presence. That lesson changes your future forever. Because once someone truly understands their emotional worth, they stop settling for relationships built on confusion, inconsistency, and emotional half-presence. And now you are standing directly at that threshold. The old version of you would have chased clarity endlessly. The new version understands something different. What is real eventually reveals itself clearly, and what cannot meet you honestly was never meant to hold your future permanently. That understanding creates peace. Not instant peace, real peace, the kind built slowly through self-respect, emotional clarity, and inner stability. And whether this person eventually finds the courage to speak their truth or remains trapped inside their own fear, your future is no longer dependent on their decision alone. You are reclaiming yourself. That is the deeper story unfolding beneath all this silence. Now, everything is becoming clear, not suddenly, but quietly and undeniably. The person thinking about you right now is no longer struggling with a temporary feeling. They are confronting the full reality of what your absence revealed inside them. And that reality changed the way they understand love itself. Because your silence forced them to experience something they spent years avoiding. Truth, not the version shaped by ego. Not the version protected by excuses, the real truth. The truth that says they lost someone who genuinely cared for them. Someone who offered emotional safety while they stayed guarded. Someone who loved honestly while they feared emotional exposure. And now that realization lives inside them permanently. Carl Jung believed that once the unconscious mind recognizes a truth fully, the personality begins reorganizing itself around that awareness. That is why they feel restless now. They can no longer comfortably return to the version of themselves that existed before this connection changed them. You changed something fundamental inside them, not through manipulation, not through emotional games, but because your love carried a level of emotional honesty they were not prepared to receive fully at the time, and now they finally understand that. Now your silence no longer looks like rejection to them. It looks like dignity. It looks like self-respect. And that realization humbles them deeply because they know you did not walk away to punish them. You walked away because staying was slowly hurting you. That truth carries enormous emotional weight, especially for someone who assumed you would continue tolerating inconsistency forever. Now they are being forced to decide who they want to become, not only for you, but for themselves, because your absence became a mirror, and mirrors are uncomfortable when someone has spent years avoiding accountability. But remember this above everything else: their awakening does not require you to pause your own life. Your responsibility now is protecting the peace you fought so hard to rebuild within yourself. Because during this silence, you transformed too. You became stronger, not colder, wiser, not bitter. You learned how to survive uncertainty without collapsing emotionally. You learned how to stop measuring your worth through another person's inconsistency. You learned how to choose yourself without guilt. That transformation is sacred. Do not abandon it now simply because someone finally recognizes your value after your absence forced them to. Because the deepest lesson here was never only about whether they would return, it was about whether you would finally return to yourself, and you did. That is why your energy feels different now, calmer, steadier, more emotionally grounded. You are no longer begging life for clarity. You are no longer trying to force someone to see your worth. You understand something now that changes everything. Real love meets you halfway willingly. Real love does not demand emotional exhaustion. Real love does not require you to sacrifice your peace just to keep another person comfortable. That understanding is your true power now. And whether this person eventually returns transformed or remains only part of your emotional history, one truth remains undeniable: you remembered your worth. You chose yourself. You stopped abandoning your own heart, trying to save someone unwilling to meet you fully. That is not weakness. That is awakening. That is healing. That is growth. And maybe that was the true purpose of this silence all along.